Ron comes, I'll have my whole crew.
There you go.
It's always a blessing.
That's Ron. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go get started this morning. Glad to be back. I'm glad to be with you all today. We're going to be continuing our study of our history and geography of the Bible material. You can have your Bibles open to the book of Numbers. I'll be opening mine there as well. Somewhere around Numbers chapter 11, 12. That'll be the first passage we get to today when we get in our Bibles. Have your Bibles open to Numbers. They're around chapters 10, 11, and 12. We'll get going in just a moment. We're going to begin with some review of our time periods to remind us of where some of the events we're going to be talking about today fall in, as long as just the story of the Bible, as well as a little bit of review about some things we've talked about in the lesson 2 weeks ago and some information about Abraham leading into to kind of give us a running start into our lesson 14 for today. So you can say these time periods along with me. We're going to start by saying them together. Number 1 is before the flood. Number 2, the flood. Number 3, scattering of the people. Number 4, patriarchs. Number 5, the Exodus. Number 6, wandering in the wilderness. Number 7, invasion and conquest of the land. Number 8, the judges. Number 9, united kingdom. Number 10, divided kingdom. Number 11, Judah alone. Number 12, captivity. Number 13, from captivity. Number 14, years of silence. Number 15, life of Christ. Number 16, early church. Number 17, letters to Christians. We'll go back, if I can maneuver my PowerPoint well, which may not be possible, but we'll see if I can. Where are we right now? So we, 2 lessons ago, talked about the Exodus, in the book, mostly focusing in the book of Exodus, the people leaving Egypt, getting towards Mount Sinai. So where would that put us around in our time periods here on our screen? Wandering in the wilderness, somewhere around there. Number 6, we've concluded that, and we're going to be talking more about that wandering today in just a little bit. Getting into some things that are related to background information for our particular lesson today, we want to begin by thinking about the promises that were made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. We talked about those 3 promises and how they're foundational for not just the book of Genesis, not just the Old Testament, but in a sense, really the whole Bible story are founded upon God fulfilling those 3 promises. And just to remind ourselves of those 3 promises, what are those 3 promises? And if someone wants a bonus imaginary gold star, you can tell me where each of these men received those promises in each chapter of the book of Genesis. So what are our 3 promises? Let's go one at a time, and let's do one person at a time. And if you answer one, you're not allowed to answer again. So somebody, what's our first promise to Abraham? Glenn? So there's the land promise within there. What about that land promise? He's going to be...
The nation would get a land for the people.
They would get a land to live in that's not their own. God was going to give them this land. So we have a land promise. What else do we know? A people promise. So starting with Abraham and Sarah, and then some of his extended family like Lot, but God promises that they're going to become a nation, a great number of people. And then our third promise is going to be...
The seed promise.
He's going to call it a seed or an offspring. What's the idea of the seed promise, Tracy?
That the Messiah, the ultimate Savior, will come through his lineage.
That there's going to be a blessing to all the nations through his seed or offspring. They don't necessarily use the word Messiah, but we understand that connection there. Do we know where we find each of those promises being made to these men?
Abraham goes into, or leaves Hebron, he's told that he's going to receive the land. He's told to go to this land. God promised him there.
So do you have a chapter and book to associate with that, roughly? Miss Rebecca? Genesis 12 for Abraham. 15 and 17 also fulfill some of that. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. What about Isaac and Jacob? They also received these blessings. Do you remember where they received these blessings too? Genesis 26 and 28. There we go. Our 3 promises may not always have them in the same order, but here on our screen we have our nation promise, our land promise, our seed, our offspring, being blessing to all nations, made in Genesis 12, 26, and 28. So when we included the Exodus story, or when we included our lesson last week about Exodus and about really that section from Exodus through Leviticus and the first part of Numbers, they've made it to Mount Sinai. They've received this covenant. They've done that by, first of all, in Exodus chapter 19, by God saying, you're going to be my people, I'm going to be your God, essentially. They agree to that. Then in Exodus chapter 20, they received the, not 10 fingers, 10 commandments, that's right. And then from there, they ratify that covenant and join in that covenant. Book of Leviticus talks a little bit more about how some of the worship and sacrifice of that covenant is going to work and being holy like God and being part of that covenant. So by the time that they receive this covenant, we're saying, at least in our class, that the first promise to Abraham has been fulfilled. The fact that they are a separate and distinct nation. Maybe you might not say that they're exactly a nation because they don't yet have the land, but the fact that they have some type of law or guiding system that's going to show that we are a distinct people from the worlds around us, if we follow this covenant and follow this law, I say that's fulfilling this particular nation promise. But moving from that story of this great exciting moment of them being a part of this covenant, we remember even in Exodus chapter 32 that they break that covenant with the golden calf. And then even later on, we see them struggling to keep that covenant going forward as they're waiting for a generation to die. Dan, can I get you to do me a favor? And I think the clicker is back there, and my iPad might be a little bit finicky. If you want to throw it, you can, but I'm worried you're going to hit Caleb right here, Taylor right here, so don't worry about that. You can just shuffle on up here. Thank you, sir. I just need this. Thank you very much. All right, so today we're talking about that group of people that was led out of the land of Egypt, but unfortunately, you can see by our happy title today, this is going to be a group of people that the majority of them are going to die wandering in the wilderness. That period we talked about, number 6 there on our sheet of review or on our things to review. We'll be in Numbers chapter 11 in just a moment, but before we go any farther, as we're talking about the history and geography of God's people, talking about the places and people that God interacted with, let's begin with prayer by going to God before we get too much farther to our lesson today. Will you pray with me, please, as we begin? Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful for this new day that you have blessed us with. We're grateful for this beginning of this week that we have to feel refreshed, to especially begin by worshiping and honoring you. We pray, Father, that you would help us to, at this time, look to grow in our knowledge and understanding of you and of your people and the places in the Bible. We do this not just to build ourselves up, to puff ourselves up with knowledge, understanding there's danger within all of that. We pray, Father, this will help us to learn more about how people relate to you, how people have either been faithful to you and to look to follow their examples in those moments, how they have been faithless to you, how they have been unfaithful to you, and learn from their mistakes and their sins and their failures. Father, we pray that we would learn about you. We learn about you being a gracious and awesome God and being a powerful and loving and just God, being one who is faithful to all that you say and promise to those who you speak to and make covenants with in the Scripture. We say that we would learn what it means to be part of a covenant relationship with you as well. We would look to be your people. Well, we do not follow the same covenant we'll be talking about today or even over the next few weeks and months, that we would understand that as your people, that we reflect your image and we look to be that holy nation and royal priesthood that would draw people to you, to come to you, to find salvation through your Son, Jesus Christ. Father, as we are into our class this morning, we are mindful of those who are not here, whether it be because of temporary sickness or more permanent sickness. We're mindful of those like Wanda Myers and Adria Latham, like the Robertsons. We pray that you would be with them. We pray that you be with those who have lost loved ones recently and their families and comfort them in their hearts in this time. We pray for those who are struggling within their hearts spiritually, who are struggling with sin, struggling with error. We pray for their hearts to be softened and that we would always look to be encouraging and patient and uplifting to them and always looking to speak the truth in love with everyone around us. Father, we thank you for your grace and for your forgiveness that you show us. May we be forgiving and gracious people to those that we interact with as well. Be with us in our study today, and in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So as we're going to be waiting for this generation to die, let's begin by getting to the point that's going to talk about this particular generation we're speaking about or thinking of. So today we're going to be picking up right where we left off with this idea of the people here at Mount Sinai. And as we're at Mount Sinai, it's just over a year since they've left Egypt. The people now in the beginning of Numbers, around Numbers chapter 10, are getting ready to go and to head towards the Promised Land. In a couple of different places, like in Deuteronomy, it's talked about how God says, the time has come, that it's time for you to go to leave Mount Sinai. So this is an encouraging moment for the people to say we're actually heading towards the Promised Land that God has made to our forefathers hundreds of years ago, to go and to take that land. God's going to fulfill that promise, and he's going to lead them along the way. Now, as they're leaving Mount Sinai, we're talking about geography. We remind ourselves the geography of the Sinai Peninsula is very rough and rugged terrain. It's probably barren of a lot of vegetation, very few places for food or water, maybe even, very little grass. You can see some of these pictures here provided by the people who put this PowerPoint together, and to see this is not necessarily where you'd want to vacation for like a resort or something like that. This would not necessarily be a place of leisure. There's going to be a difficult journey along the way. And as they're going along that way, well, something we probably remember about the book of Numbers is there's lots of complaining in the book of Numbers. We might remember the censuses or the censi, whatever the plural of census is, that are taken within the book. But there's a lot of complaining. God, I'm hungry. God, I'm thirsty. God, you never take care of us. Oh, I wish we were still in Egypt. We had all the food and all the water we ever wanted. Lots of selective memories there within that complaining about how they were actually treated in Egypt and the condition that they were in. And one of those situations is here early on in Numbers chapter 11. They've just left Mount Sinai, and they're already complaining again. So here in Numbers chapter 11, we read together somewhere around here in verse 4. Let's read verse 4 through verse 5 and through verse 6. Can I get someone to read Numbers chapter 11, verse 4 through verse 6 for me, please, nice and loud? Numbers chapter 11, verse 4 through verse 6.
And the rabble who were among them had greedy desires, and also the sons of Israel wept again and said, Who will give us meat to eat? We'll remember the fish which we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now our appetite is gone. There is nothing at all to look at except this manna.
All right. I made a mistake there, so we need to all categorize what Becca just read for us, and that's my fault. And we're going to back up, and I'm going to pack these first three verses. That's what I meant to have here. That's on me. Numbers chapter 11, verse 1 through verse 3. This is where we read about Numbers chapter 11, verse 1. The people complained in the hearing of the Lord about this misfortunes, that the Lord heard it. And his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outlying parts of the camp. The people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord that the fire died down. So the name of that place was called Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. Here we have just general complaining, it seems like. In a moment we'll get to more specific complaining about things like food that Becca read for us that we're cataloging for just a moment. But along our journey here, we're going to follow this particular map. And a couple of times we're going to be able to see some of their suggested routes. We don't have necessarily for certain, where was it that they crossed the Red Sea exactly, or is this exactly the route when they get up more towards the Promised Land in Edom or Moab, as they're outside of the land of Canaan? We'll at least get some general direction of where they're heading. They're heading back north. If I want to go back for just a moment. Where is Canaan on this particular map?
Way at the top.
Way up here at the top. And so if we're going to get up here, we're all the way down here in the Sinai Peninsula, we need to make this journey up to this place. We need to get up here towards where God actually promised us the land is going to be. So moving on from that, we get our line drawn. A few miles farther along, this is where they begin to complain about the manna they've had. They want the fish and all the food of Egypt. They're tired of just the same thing every day over and over and over and over and over again, which maybe we can relate to as people. That does not excuse the fact that God has been providing for them without them having to do work of anything. If it was on their own to provide for their own food, for how many people? I mean, we're not talking about, 10 people going on a road trip together. How many people are we talking about for the nation of Israel to have food to eat? Over 600,000 men. You say there's women and children with that. Probably at least 1 million, 1 to maybe 2 million within that. So within that, you're looking for lots of people. And God is providing food for them. And they're complaining about that particular food. And again, we see God's displeasure of the people there. So he sends this plague through this quail. And as it talks about that in Numbers chapter 11, the fact that the people are going to eat so much quail that it's going to come out of their nostrils. I'm not sure if that's actually what happened or just an implication of this is going to be some type of plague for us there. Tracy?
Jeff, before, any thoughts as to what the burning of the people on the outside was?
That's back there in verse 1 of chapter 11.
One burning on the outskirts of the camp. The vision I got of that was people lagging behind, weren't really paying attention, and the heat was so rough that they didn't make it. And that was my vision as I was reading it. But
Of like sun heat or
That's
of
what I
like
thought.
God
I
heat?
don't know. The heat.
It's implied in here, it seems to be that the fire of the Lord, there in verse 1 and even in verse 3. I really don't have much more to say about that, though. It seems that there's some type of divine interaction here, but I can't say much more about that particular area at this moment. So, sorry that's not helpful right now, but I'll do some more and I'll get back to you about that. Glenn?
Was it the people that were complaining that he was burning?
I would imagine so. There are times that God will afflict the whole people. It seems like the whole nation of people are kind of all on board with this complaining and this displeasure, and so God's just going to start sending a plague through the whole groups. We'll see things like that at times in the book of Numbers. But it seems like right now God's afflicting or kind of targeting those who would be complainers, I would imagine. But
They usually tend to go on the outskirts.
That's
maybe
what
on the
I-
outskirts, kind of
But the complainers were like lagging behind, weren't sure they really wanted to come, weren't very enthusiastic, about all this, and just
Yeah.
being drug up. That's kind of how the vision I had.
Yeah, I don't know if that's exactly what that is, but there's definitely a lesson within that particular thought of that for sure as well. So we're getting back into this quail. They move along the way, a couple miles from where they were in that last particular plague. They're finally going to get to Kadesh Barnea in the wilderness of Paran. And I want to get to the map, because this is where we're going to talk about, we're camped here for a little while. In Numbers chapter 13 and 14, right here, and we've made some significant progress from Mount Sinai here to the wilderness of Paran in this particular area. You see that labeled there, to Kadesh Barnea. If I remember right, it says in Deuteronomy, it's a 10 days journey from here at Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea. So they're right on the edge of the promised land, and within 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, they could have gone in and could have started their time in invading the land and conquering the land with God leading them. But we probably remember Numbers chapter 13 and 14, when some spies go into the land and check out the land. And what does the spies report from Numbers chapter 13 there, especially towards the end of that report?
We are not able to go up against them.
So that's all right. We eventually get to the we're not able. Miss Rebecca?
Can.
Of the tribes said they were not able. You say, Jacob, Joshua and Caleb, being the two different tribes, from Judah, said that they could. So you could say that two tribes said they could go in,
Sure, true.
representing the people.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting that 10 tribes said they couldn't, two said they could.
Yep.
And then later at the divided kingdom, you have the 10 tribes. So it always seemed to be 10 that were a little less
On
adherent to
board.
God's law than the two.
Right.
Not counting Levi. Levi would have been faithful. They stayed with Judah.
Right.
When the other 10 left.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I thought it was an interesting thought. That it seems to always be 10.
There seems to be
A split.
particular type of thread that's running there. We'll have to try to follow that thread along the way as we follow the story, for sure. So we're not able to go into the land. What do they say about the land itself, though? Even before we get to the kind of the scary parts. Glenn?
Full of milk and honey. They were supposed to go in and see whether the cities were big or small, and whether they were weak or strong.
Mm-hmm.
And all things is what their task was to.
Right. So it's fulfilling what God said it was. I'm going to give you land flowing with milk and honey. This is going to be very bountiful for you. Remember what they came back with? It talked about some of the men coming back with grapes, and they had to carry it on branches. In kids' Bible class, you always had grapes that were like as big as a globe or something like that. I don't know if it's exactly like that, but boy, you really play that up for kids to be like, wow, this is amazing. And they turned that down because the cities were big and the people were big, and that was scary to them. There's a note within. They were walled cities. There's a note here within our material on page 59. 2, 3, 4. The 6th paragraph down, if you have the workbook, this particular note says, remember in our earlier description of Egypt in lesson 6, we noted that Egypt was a united government very early in their history. So they did not build walls around their cities. The walled cities of Canaan, therefore, looked formidable to these ex-slaves from Egypt. They were forgetting God's promise that he would care for them and would give them the land in spite of all obstacles. Human nature helps us understand some of their fears, but it does not excuse their lack of faith. I really appreciated that note. The fact that where they had been for the past hundreds of years had been a place where they wouldn't have experienced lots of walled or fortified cities with people to defend them like that. So when they approach some of that, it probably would be kind of terrifying. Especially, again, this is not trained militia who are skilled, have knowledge of how to go into, siege and fortify or to attack a city. These are ex-slaves who God is leading here to them. But God is leading them. It's not just them going by Moses and Joshua's own authority and leadership. God is leading them along this way. And they lack faith in God here. And so ultimately, because of their lack of faith, because of the lack of faith of these 10 spies that seems to infiltrate to the rest of the tribes, at least to the 10 tribes and maybe to the groups as a whole, besides Caleb and Joshua and Moses and Aaron that we have record of in Numbers chapter 13 and 14, we're going to lead to these spies leading some issues. Those 2 spies Caleb and Joshua are trying to stick along with God and crying out for faith in his promises. The people are ready to stone them to death. Do you remember that in Numbers chapter 14? Moses and Aaron, along with Caleb and Joshua, are speaking about the truth, about how God can bring them into the land, deliver them into the land. In verse 10 of Numbers chapter 14, the congregation said to stone them with stones, but the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. And it's a very similar experience to what happened in Exodus chapter 32 and 33 and 34, where you see God's ready to destroy the people, but Moses intercedes for them. God relents from destroying the whole nation, but he is going to execute a judgment on them. Ms. Rebecca?
I appreciated the word that he said, these men will not go in. A lot of times we teach that no one went in except
Right.
Joshua and Caleb and anyone under 20. But we know Eliezer went in.
Mm-hmm.
He was the son, one of the sons of
Aaron.
He was a tribe of Levi.
Mm-hmm.
He had been made a priest at Mount Sinai, so he had to be over 20 years old to be made a priest. He went in. Phinehas went in. Phinehas would have been his son. He probably might have been young.
Right.
But you go back to chapter 11, verse 21, it says, the people among whom I am, this is Moses speaking, are 600,000 on foot. And you have said, I will give them meat. He's referring only to the men. The men seem to take precedence over everything. They were the ones that were identified. And then if you go to Numbers 14, verse 22, it says, surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs, which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not listened to my voice. That's what he's saying. They would not go in. And then in Deuteronomy 32, verses 11 through 13, he says, none of the men who came up from Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the land, which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, for they have not followed me fully.
Right.
So I'm fairly certain that most of the tribe of Levi got to go in, because Levi didn't even send spies.
Right.
Uh,
And the women and children seem
some of
to
the
may
women
go.
might have gone. Now, I
Yeah.
realize in a generation, the women would probably got along with the men.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we jump to conclusions
Right.
that are really not the right conclusion.
Right.
To say that no one but Joshua and Caleb and anybody under 20.
Mhm.
Moses could have gone in.
Right.
He would have gone in if he had not sinned later by striking.
Right. We'll get to that in a little bit. So let's talk about some of them for a moment, though. Let's talk about the punishment for a second. The idea of they're going to wander for 40 years. God uses the illustration, or illustration is probably the wrong word, but makes the comparison. The spies were gone for 40 days, so a year for each day is how long you're going to wander and be outside of the land. Talking about the people. I either skipped over it and when I was rushing through my PowerPoint. Let's get Numbers chapter 11 and verse 3. Numbers chapter 11, verse 3, the people are complaining and they're fearful even after Numbers chapter 14, verse 3. 14, verse 3. The people are complaining. They say, why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? It does seem that this is kind of maybe more of the thoughts of the soldiers who are having to go and to do the fighting. If I'm one of those 600, 3,550, whatever the number is from earlier in the book, the specific of there, and I have to go and fight, and I'm hearing other people around me are scared and discouraged and upset and threatened, then I might feel some of that kind of leaks into me as well, and I'm going to be scared and concerned. And I might say, I'm worried or concerned about my wife or my children, or, we're not strong enough, might not just not have the faith in God that I need to have. But later on, God is going to say in verse 31 of Numbers chapter 14, your little ones, who you said will become a prey, I will bring in, and they shall know the land that you have rejected. There's a sad irony within that. When they were saying that if we try to go take this land, our little ones will never make it. They'll just be destroyed by these warriors of Canaan. But God says, no, those little ones are going to go in. And in fact, it seems to maybe some of what Miss Rebecca was saying, that some of their wives may have gone in as well. Now, it may have been over a 40-year period. Some of those women died off. But that's true that we should not say that everyone from this generation besides Caleb and Joshua didn't get to go. So from there, they wander around. I do need to go back. The people were upset at first in Numbers chapter 14 after God says he wants to destroy them all. Moses intercedes for them. I wonder if they know how much Moses did for them and how much he interceded for them, because they understand that they don't get to go into the land, and Moses delivers that message to them. And then they say in Numbers chapter 14, somewhere around verse 30 or verse 40, early in the morning they went up to the heights of the hills of the country, saying, here we are, we will go up to the place that the Lord has promised, for we have sinned. It's kind of like, oh, we made a mistake, and now we're ready to go. We probably shouldn't have said we don't want to go. I think the King James says, lo, we be here, which kind of just is a funny phrase to me in today's English. But with this idea that we're going to go and take the land, God says, no, now is not the time. There's no sense of, you can be sorry now, but the punishment or the judgment has been made. And so God is going to be faithful to what he said, and that's what happens. They don't get to go to the land. So they wander around for 38 years. We don't have a whole lot of detail about these 38 years of wandering, other than it seems they just made very little to no progress, and people continued to die from that group of the military who would have gone in. And those group of people would have just, day after day, maybe a few or a few dozen are passing away. And you're realizing and seeing that these people who should have been going and enjoying the milk and honey and the large grapes and all the cities and all those things, all this wandering is just leading to nothingness. You see the damage that can happen when we lack faith in the Lord. There's another plague that's talked about within all of this. Eventually, we do read about this in Numbers chapter 20. I believe it is here. Let's turn over to Numbers chapter 20, where we see Aaron and Moses learning about their faith to not be able to enter the land. In Numbers chapter 20 here, we might be familiar with, there is the time that God's going to provide water for his people. They're complaining about how thirsty we are. Before God has done this, and he had Moses strike a rock, and water came out, and everything worked out well. Here, in Numbers chapter 20, we want to look at verse 10 and verse 11 and verse 12. Someone read for me Numbers chapter 20, verse 10, 11, and 12. Nice and loud, please. Numbers chapter 20, 10 through 12.
And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given you.
Thank you, Clint. God told Moses to speak. Moses struck, and the water still came out. And we have up here on the screen the fact that Moses was angry. I want to get to this next particular slide that talks about God told Moses to speak to the rock. Water came forth, but Moses struck it. We see the location where this happened. What's the real issue here, though? Go back and look at verse 10. Who before you look too closely at verse 10, who brings the water from the rock? God does. Who does Moses say brings the water from the rock? In Numbers chapter 20 and verse 10. We. Moses is picking himself up pretty highly here and saying that I'm going to bring some of this water just as much or just as equally as God is. And in fact, when God calls out Moses and Aaron in verse 12, because you did not believe in me, I don't think that's necessarily because you struck the rock instead of spoke it. More, he goes on to say, you didn't uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people. And so you're not going to lead the people into the land. So Rebecca, real quick.
In Psalms 106, verse 32, clarifies that. It says, they also provoked him to wrath at the waters of Meribah. So they went hard with Moses on their account. Because they were rebellious against his spirit, and he spoke rashly with his lips.
Yeah. And we see in Deuteronomy over and over again, we've been doing some work in Deuteronomy in some of our sermons this year, and we've seen in these first couple of chapters, especially chapters 1 through 3, Moses talking about how, it's because of you that I'm not going in. And I don't think that's Moses not understanding the blame. I think he's within all of that understanding that I was so burdened and I made this mistake and I spoke rashly in this regard. And I put myself in a position I should not have. And we read in Deuteronomy, it seems like times where Moses has been having private interactions with God, pleading with him, can I still go into the land? The fact that Moses feels confident enough to approach God and ask him that is pretty amazing to show their significance of their relationship. But God is very sure and stands firm and says, no, you're not going to lead Joshua. It's going to lead the people. We read about that here in Numbers at somewhere, and we'll read about that in Deuteronomy as well. So God's going to lead them to the promised land. Originally, they're right here at Kadesh Barnea. They wandered around in the wilderness of Zin for a while. You can see that red line very top starts to branch up as their failed attempt to try to go up into the land on their own accord, which did not go great. So moving somewhat quickly through some of these next particular slides, we see God's going to lead them into the land of Esau, or the land of Edom, which is related to Esau, or the descendants of Esau. But they're not going to be able to take any of that land because that's Edom's land. So from there, they're going to find another route along the way. We see that they're going to go from, our blue line is going to come up very slowly here. So I'm going to talk while it comes up along the way. They're not able to go through that particular area. They're going to go back along the Dead Sea, looking for another map. We're going to get to in just a second some of the places that talks about they're going to go to within Edom's jurisdiction. So they go into Edom, but they're not going to take any of this land in Edom. Here's our line coming up a little bit more. They're eventually going to work their way on the eastern side of the Jordan River in the land of Moab and the land of Ammon, just to the east. They're not really going to go into Ammon and some of this area that would be kind of more of the Moabites. So within this particular area, they're going to cross the Zered River just south of Moab. They're going to go into that area, but they're not allowed to take any of that area. And because of that, they kind of go in this roundabout fashion. They go up into to meet, I think it's the king of Shion, and they get along the way. And they're going to go into invade in some of that area, and God's actually going to give them some of that land. Shion of the Ammonites controlled the territory between the Arnon River and Jabbok River. They come out to meet the Israelites in battle, even though originally the Israelites asked for safe passage, and God gives them victory in that particular battle. From there, we see them going even farther north, conquering the king of Og. So they end up taking basically all of this land to the east. Everything from right here around by the Dead Sea up towards where Mount Hermon is, north of, what is this particular lake right here? The Sea of Galilee. I probably should have said sea instead, but that particular area. This area is going to be under Israelite control for the most part in this time period. This is eventually going to be given to the 3 or the 2.5 tribes on the east side of the Jordan. We'll talk about them probably a little bit more once we get into Joshua. There's the group of the Ammonites. For right now, they don't really do much, but we'll see them in the book of Judges. We see them constantly trying to get at some of the good land that's to the east there. The Ammonites, what's right over here on the other side of the Ammonites? The what desert? There's the Arabian desert is there. And so not a great place to live, not a great place to feed or provide for yourself. When you see territory that could be much better, well watered or provided for within this particular area, right next to the Jordan River, that's probably good-looking territory. So the Ammonites are going to constantly be kind of working their way in to get some of that territory for themselves. We're still in Numbers, talking a little bit about Balak. You may remember Balak and Balaam told to curse the Israelites. God doesn't allow those curses to happen, but we do see that Balaam advises Balak how to lead Israel into sin. And Balaam kind of becomes this character we read about even further into the Bible and even the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, the book of Jude. I believe he's talked about maybe even in 2 Peter as well, this idea that here's someone who's willing for maybe greedy gain, or especially just with a lack of concern for God's will. You see someone who is going to lead people astray. So that leads to this moment where there's another plague that happens. Let's go ahead and catch this in the book of Numbers, chapter 25. Numbers 25, we might remember this story of Phinehas. In Numbers 25 and verse 1, while Israel lived at Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. These invited the people to their sacrifice of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. Israel yoked himself with Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. The Lord said to Moses, "Take all the chiefs of the people and hang them in the sun before the Lord, the fierce anger of the Lord might turn away from Israel." Moses said to the judges of Israel, "Each of you kill those men who have yoked themselves to Baal of Peor." Verse 6, "Behold, one of the people of Israel came and brought a Midianite woman to his family in the sight of Moses, in the sight of the whole congregation of the people of Israel, while they were weeping in the entrance of the tent of meeting. And when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he rose, left the congregation, took a spear in his hand, went after the man of Israel into the chamber, and pierced them both, the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. Thus the plague on the people of Israel has stopped. Nevertheless, those who died by the plague were 24,000. The Moabites, here, this particular place, and at other times in Israel's history, are going to be a nation that's going to try to lead them into idolatry. And I don't know if that's necessarily a blatant, attack on them with that way. I think it's more of we can kind of join this union, and if their union is kind of based around things like with Baal or other goddesses or idols that deal with sexual pleasure, that sounds like a lot better than holy living and some of the commands that God has had his people to say you have to live in this more self-controlled, holy lifestyle, rather than you can indulge in your pleasures that you want to indulge in. Now, there's probably more to say about the issue there with all of that, but you can see maybe why they give into it, and you can see why God is so angry with them when they turn their back on him. The book of Deuteronomy, then, as we quickly cover the whole book of Deuteronomy, I think pretty much on this slide, Moses' death is not far away, but he wants to instruct the people how to prepare themselves for when they're going to take the land. And particularly Deuteronomy chapter 27 and 28 is going to tell them about how they're going to live faithfully and either receive the blessings of this covenant, or if they live faithlessly, they're going to receive the curses of this covenant. And then Moses dies on top of Mount Nebo. He's 120, was buried by the hand of God. Who's going to lead them across the river now? Joshua will. We read about that more in the book of Joshua. In Joshua chapter 4, we read about them crossing the Jordan River. You might think about, well, Jordan, a river is not as big as a sea, so that's not maybe as big of a deal. That we should never think that way. The fact that God stops the waters from coming, and the Jordan River at times can be pretty shallow, but this is during a flood season it talks about. So during a flood season, there's going to be lots of water. God stops the water further up, and they cross on dry land. This is almost like kind of a new exodus that's happening. They're exiting from the land on the east side of the Jordan into the actual promised land. And we're going to get more about that actual invasion and conquest here in a couple of weeks. But we see that the Israelites reserved a Passover feast, remembered the night that they left Egypt exactly 40 years earlier. I'm going to read a final note from our workbook. If you have a workbook on page 62, Joshua led the people across the Jordan on dry land even during flood season, and immediately God demanded an act on faith on the part of the people. And here they are in the new land, in the midst of their enemies. God tells them to circumcise all the males that they had been born in the wilderness. God could have told them that on the east side of the river. That would have been a lot more safe territory. They had already conquered that. But here now, if God says, cross the river, be right on the outside of Jericho. In fact, you've already sent your spies to Jericho, and Jericho is very aware of your presence. And now, circumcise all your soldiers, all the people who have been circumcised when you were wandering in the wilderness, give them time to heal so you're vulnerable and defenseless, and then you're going to go take the city. God is a great act of faith on their part to do that, to put themselves in that vulnerable position. But it's showing, it seems right now, a turn of faith for the people, that while Joshua and the leaders with him are leading, we see faith in their lives. And we'll see some of that going forward as we'll get more into this invasion and conquest particular periods and history of God's people. Next week, we're going to do some review, though. We're going to be reviewing the Exodus and the wandering in the wilderness, a review of, if you have material, lessons 13 and 14. We're spending some time probably looking at maps, talking about places, talking about people and dates and events. Look over that. We do review along the way to help us try to seep these things into our brains a little bit more, to learn about God fulfilling his promises, to learn about the Lord, and to hopefully draw us closer to him, as we mentioned. That's our class for today. I flew through like everything from after the 12 spies through today. If you have comments or questions after class, there's always seems a couple people who do. Feel free to come and talk to me. Otherwise, we'll continue to move forward with our lessons to Lesson 15 next Sunday. Thank you so much for being here, for your comments and attention this morning.